This is Criminal Interrupted. In 2006, Abraham Shakespeare's life changed with a single lottery ticket. Overnight, a man who had worked hard, lived quietly, and asked for little suddenly held millions of dollars. To some, it looked like a miracle, but for Abraham, it became a curse. As the money drew people closer, so did the danger. Friends became opportunists, strangers became predators, and within just a few years, Abraham was gone, vanished without explanation, leaving behind a family desperate for answers and a community asking how fortune could turn so fatally. In this episode, we'll follow Abraham's story from the moment of his win to the betrayal that cost him his life. We'll examine how greed and manipulation turned generosity into vulnerability, and how investigators uncovered the truth buried beneath layers of lies. This is the story of Abraham Shakespeare, a man whose dream became a nightmare, and whose murder reveals the darkest side of sudden fortune. Before Abraham Shakespeare became a headline, before the lottery ticket, before the cameras, before the tragedy, he was simply Abraham. Born on April 24, 1966, in Lakeland, Florida, Abraham grew up in a working-class family. He was the eldest of several siblings, and from a young age, he carried the weight of responsibility. Those who knew him described him as quiet, soft-spoken, and deeply loyal to the people he loved. He didn't have an easy path. Abraham left school early and worked a series of low-wage jobs, construction, labouring, and eventually as a truck driver's assistant. He wasn't a man of wealth or privilege. He was a man who worked with his hands, who knew what it meant to struggle to make ends meet. Friends and family often said Abraham wasn't interested in material things. He didn't dream of luxury cars or big houses. What mattered to him was stability, and above all, providing for his sons. Abraham remained a devoted father, determined to give his children the kind of security he himself had rarely known. Those who knew him best described him as generous to a fault. Even before the lottery, Abraham was the kind of man who would give what little he had to someone who needed it more. He valued honesty, loyalty, and kindness, qualities that made him beloved in his community, but also, tragically, qualities that left him vulnerable. Abraham Shakespeare's life changed forever in 2006, when a simple stop for lottery tickets turned into a $30 million win. At the time, he was living modestly in Lakeland, Florida, working as a truck driver's assistant. Overnight, Abraham went from relative obscurity to sudden fame. His name splashed across headlines, and his face broadcasted on television. Instead of taking the full amount spread out in annual payments, he chose the one-time lump sum option. That payout came to be about $17 million after taxes. So while the headlines often say $30 million winner, the actual amount Abraham walked away with, the money he could access, was about $17 million. For many, a jackpot like that would seem like the ultimate blessing. But for Abraham, it marked the beginning of a long and painful unraveling. The money brought attention, not just from the media, but from family, acquaintances, and complete strangers. Everyone seemed to want something from him. Requests for help poured in, and Abraham, generous by nature, gave freely. He paid bills, brought gifts, and tried to ease the burdens of those around him. But generosity has its limits, and soon his wealth became less a source of joy than a magnet for exploitation. One of the most pivotal choices Abraham made was to step into the public eye. At first, he considered staying anonymous, but eventually he agreed to interviews and photographs. That decision, understandable in the excitement of the moment, opened the door to relentless scrutiny. Financial advisors, distant relatives, and opportunists of every kind began circling, each hoping to carve out a piece of his fortune. The transformation was stark. Abraham went from a quiet, hard-working man to a figure whose every move was tracked and dissected. And as the spotlight grew brighter, so did his isolation. Trust became harder to come by. The simple, private life he once valued slipped further and further away, replaced by suspicion, pressure, and loneliness. Not long after Abraham Shakespeare's life changed with that winning ticket, he found himself in a courtroom, not celebrating but defending. The man who brought him there was Michael Ford, a truck driver Abraham had worked alongside in November 2006. Ford claimed that the winning ticket wasn't Abraham's at all. He said Abraham had stolen it straight from his wallet during a delivery route. Here's what happened. On November 15th, 2006, Ford stopped at a convenience store in Frostproof, Florida. Abraham handed him $2 and asked him to buy a couple of Quick Pick Lotto tickets. The amount of times I said Quick Pick Lotto tickets is ridiculous. Days later, one of those tickets turned out to be worth $30 million. But instead of celebrating his co-worker's good fortune, Ford filed a lawsuit. In May 2007, he demanded at least $1 million, claiming the ticket was his. The case went to trial in October 2007. Abraham took the stand, quiet but firm. He told the jury he had given Ford the money for the tickets and that the winning ticket was rightfully his. The jury agreed. They rejected Ford's claim and ruled in Abraham's favor. Outside the courtroom, Abraham spoke about the ordeal. He said if Ford had simply asked him for help, he would have given him $250,000. But suing him over what he called dirty money was something he couldn't forgive. In interviews and conversations with those closest to him, Abraham admitted the truth. The money hadn't brought him peace. It had stolen it. He told his brother, quote, "I'd have been better off broke." To a childhood friend he confessed, quote, "I thought all these people were my friends, but then I realized all they want is just money." And in one of the most haunting reflections of all, Abraham said he wished he could go back, that he wanted his old life again. The quiet life, the simple life, the life where he wasn't a target. By the time Abraham Shakespeare disappeared in 2009, much of his fortune was gone. Though he received a lump sum of about $17 million after taxes in 2006, Abraham's generosity and lavish spending after the excitement had drained his wealth. He bought a modest home in a gated community, a used Rolex, and a Nissan Altima, but most of his money went to helping others, paying bills, buying cars, and handing out cash to people who asked. Friends later told investigators that Abraham's fortune had dwindled to about $1 million, and it was at this vulnerable moment that a woman named Dorice D.D. Moore entered his life. Dorice Donegan Moore was born in Florida in 1972. She grew up in Central Florida, and in 1992, she married James Moore. 3 years later, in 1995, she gave birth to a son. On the surface, she appeared to be building a conventional family life, but beneath that image, Moore's financial and personal troubles were already mounting. By the early 2000s, Moore was struggling with money. In 2001, she filed for bankruptcy, citing debt she couldn't pay. Around the same time, she became entangled in a fraud scheme. Investigators later revealed that she had staged a carjacking in order to collect insurance money. Though she avoided prison by entering a diversion program, the case revealed a pattern. Moore was willing to manipulate situations for financial gain. Friends and acquaintances described her as manipulative, controlling, and eager to project success. She often presented herself as a savvy businesswoman, someone who could handle money and make deals. But the reality was far less stable. Her finances were shaky, her reputation was questionable, and her personal life marked by turbulence. Moore was introduced to Abraham through a mutual acquaintance. At first, she claimed she wanted to write a book about his rags to riches story, the casual laborer who had gone from hauling boxes in a truck to holding millions in his bank account. But almost immediately, her interest shifted. She told Abraham she could help him manage what was left of his money, protecting him from the endless stream of people asking for handouts, and give him the peace of mind he desperately craved. For a man who had grown weary of being used, Moore's offer must have sounded like relief. Moore then set up a company called Abraham Shakespeare, LLC. On paper, it was meant to manage his assets. In reality, it gave her control of his finances. And once she had that control, she began siphoning money almost immediately. Court records later showed that Moore withdrew about $1 million. She spent it on herself, buying a Hummer, a Corvette, a truck, and even taking vacations. When questioned, she insisted that the money had been a gift from Abraham, but investigators would later prove otherwise. Moore's manipulation wasn't just financial. She began to isolate Abraham from the people who cared about him. Friends and family noticed that she had controlled access to him, often speaking on his behalf. If someone wanted to see Abraham, they had to go through Dee Dee. She also worked to control the narrative of his life. When people asked what Abraham was, Moore would offer explanations. He was tired of being harassed. He wanted to disappear for a while. He was living quietly somewhere else. Later, when Abraham vanished completely, she even sent text messages from his phone to family members, despite the fact that Abraham was illiterate and couldn't read or write. Moore's lies grew bolder. She told people Abraham had left town and that he was hiding from the constant demands for money. She even claimed he was in the Caribbean, living a carefree life away from the spotlight. But behind the scenes, she was spending his money, transferring assets into her name, and weaving a web of deception that would eventually collapse under its own weight. To understand how Moore was able to manipulate Abraham so effectively, it's important to remember who he was. Abraham was generous, trusting, and weary of being used. He longed for someone who could shield him from the constant demands. Moore stepped into that role, presenting herself as a savior, but in reality, she was exploiting his vulnerability for her own gain. The last confirmed sighting of Abraham was in April 2009. For months afterwards, his family and friends heard nothing. At first, some hoped he had simply walked away, that he had taken what remained of his money and started over somewhere far from the spotlight. But as silence stretched on, hope gave way to fear. On November 9, 2009, Abraham's family officially reported him as missing. His mother, Elizabeth Walker, told deputies she hadn't seen her son in months. His brother, Robert Brown, said the same. For a man who had always stayed close to his family, the absence was alarming. The Polk County Sheriff's Office opened a missing person case. At first, investigators considered the possibility that Abraham had left voluntarily. After all, he had often said he regretted winning the lottery. Maybe, they thought, he had simply disappeared to escape the pressure. But almost immediately, the story didn't add up. Family members began receiving text messages from Abraham's phone. The messages claimed he was fine, that he was just tired of being harassed, and that he wanted to be left alone. But there was a problem. Abraham was illiterate. He couldn't read or write. He could barely sign his own name. His mother knew instantly. Those texts weren't from her son. Investigators turned their attention to the people around Abraham, and one name kept coming up: Dorice D.D. Moore. She had inserted herself into his life in 2008, claiming she wanted to write a book about him, then offering to help manage his money. By 2009, she had complete control of his finances through the company she created in his name. When detectives initially questioned Moore, she insisted that Abraham was still alive. She said that he had left town to escape the constant demands for money. She even claimed she was still in contact with him. To prove it, she showed him the text messages, but the texts only deepened the suspicion. Moore's behavior then grew stranger. She told investigators Abraham had given her his assets as gifts. She claimed that he wanted her to have his cars, his house, even his remaining money. She said he trusted her more than anyone else. But friends and family told a different story. They said Abraham had grown distant after Moore entered his life. They said she controlled access to him, often speaking for him, and they said Abraham had confided that he didn't trust her. As detectives dug deeper, they uncovered a web of lies. Moore had tried to pay people to say they had seen Abraham alive. She offered one man $200,000 to deliver a letter supposedly written by Abraham, a letter that would explain his disappearance. But the man went to the police instead. Investigators also discovered Moore had been spending Abraham's money freely. She bought a Hummer, a Corvette, and a truck. She went on vacations, she paid off her debts, and she did it all while insisting Abraham had given her the money as gifts. By late 2009, detectives were convinced they were no longer looking for a missing person. They were looking for a body. The break came in January 2010. Investigators received information from an associate of Moore's, Gregory Smith, who had been cooperating with the police. Smith wore a wire during conversations with Moore, and she eventually led him to the location of Abraham's body. And on January 2010, acting on this tip, detectives searched a property in Plant City, Florida, owned by Moore's boyfriend's relative. Beneath a freshly poured concrete slab in the backyard, they found Abraham's remains. He had been shot twice in the chest. The discovery confirmed what Abraham's family had long suspected. He hadn't run away. He hadn't started a new life. He had been murdered. The investigation quickly zeroed in on Moore. The evidence was overwhelming. She had motive, control of Abraham's remaining money. She had opportunity. She was with him in the months before he vanished. And she had left a trail of lives and financial transactions that pointed directly to her. On February 2, 2010, deputies arrested Dee Moore. She was 37 years old at the time. She was calm, dressed casually in jeans and flip-flops, and she was handcuffed and booked into Orient Road Jail in Tampa. To cameras outside, she insisted that she was innocent, but to detectives inside, she began to spin a new web of explanations. When detectives brought Moore in for questioning, they already suspected she knew far more than she was admitting. What followed was a series of shifting stories, each one more implausible than the last. At first, Moore insisted that Abraham Shakespeare was still alive. She told investigators he had grown tired of people asking for money and had decided to disappear. She claimed he was hiding out, enjoying a quiet life away from the spotlight. To back up her story, she then pointed to the text messages supposedly sent by Abraham. But detectives knew the truth. Abraham was illiterate. When pressed further, Moore changed her story. She admitted that she had sent some of the texts herself, but said she only did it to help Abraham, to cover for him while he was away. She claimed she was protecting him from people who wouldn't leave him alone. At one stage, she even claimed he left town because he was pretending to have AIDS for child support, so she was helping him. But detectives weren't convinced. They asked about the money. By then, Moore had control of Abraham's assets through Abraham Shakespeare LLC. She had withdrawn about $1 million, buying herself cars, vacations, and luxury items. As questions grew sharper, Moore's explanation shifted again. She admitted that she had purchased lime, bleach, gloves, and plastic sheeting, items investigators believed were used to conceal Abraham's body. She admitted she had tried to arrange for his remains to be moved, even pointing out the concrete slab where he was buried, but she denied killing him. Instead, Moore tried to push the blame onto others. She suggested that unarmed men were responsible for Abraham's death. At one point, she claimed a drug dealer had killed him. At another, she said Abraham had been shot during a confrontation she had nothing to do with. Each time, the details changed. Detectives pressed harder. Who were these men? Why didn't you call the police if you knew Abraham had been murdered? Why did you buy lime, bleach, gloves, and plastic sheeting? Why did you point out the exact spot where his body was buried? Moore had no clear answers. She claimed she was afraid. She said she was only trying to protect herself. She insisted she'd been caught up in something bigger than she could control. But detectives weren't buying it. They pointed out that she hadn't just failed to get help. She had actively covered up the crime. She'd sent fake texts, bribed people to lie, and even offered money for someone to deliver a forged letter from Abraham. She'd spent his money on cars, vacations, and luxury items. The absurdity in her stories was clear. If she'd truly been an innocent bystander, why had she gone to such extraordinary lengths to hide the truth? And most damning of all, Abraham's remains, buried under concrete on property connected to Moore. In the end, Moore's story only deepened the case against her. What began as a claim that Abraham was alive unraveled into a patchwork of lies, contradictions, and desperate attempts to deflect the blame. For investigators, it was clear. Dee Moore hadn't just exploited Abraham Shakespeare, she silenced him. 2 years later, in December 2012, Dorice Dee Moore went on trial for first-degree murder of Abraham Shakespeare. The case drew national attention. In the courtroom, prosecutors painted Moore as manipulative, greedy, and ruthless. A woman who had befriended Abraham under the guise of helping him, only to exploit and ultimately kill him. The state's case was built on 3 pillars. Motive: Moore had drained Abraham's remaining fortune, spending lavishly on herself. Opportunity: she was the last person known to be with him before he vanished. And the cover-up: she fabricated texts, bribed witnesses, and even directed investigators to the burial site. Prosecutors argued that Moore killed Abraham sometime in April 2009, then buried him under concrete to hide the crime. They presented evidence of her purchases: lime bleach gloves, and testimony from witnesses who said she had confessed or tried to enlist them in her cover-up. Moore's defense team tried to cast doubt. They argued there was no direct evidence, no eyewitness to the shooting, and no murder weapon conclusively tied to her. They suggested others might have killed Abraham, pointing to his complicated financial dealings and the many people who owed him money. Moore herself took the stand. She denied killing Abraham and insisted she had only tried to help him. She claimed she was guilty of poor judgment, of wanting to try to protect him from people who wanted his money, but not of murder. But her testimony was riddled with contradictions. Jurors heard the recordings of her interrogation, where she admitted to moving money, sending fake texts, and even discussing the burial site. They saw the financial trail that showed her spending Abraham's fortune on cars, vacations, and luxury items. And on December 10, 2012, after just 3 hours of deliberation, the jury returned its verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. The judge did not mince words. He called Moore the most manipulative person he had ever seen in his courtroom. He then sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For Abraham's family, the verdict brought justice, but not closure. His mother, Elizabeth Walker, said she still couldn't understand how someone could take advantage of her son's kindness in such a cruel way. And his brother, Robert Brown, said Abraham's generosity had been his undoing. Abraham also left behind 2 young sons. His eldest, Moses Shakespeare, was born in 2001 to Antoinette Andrews. His youngest, Jeremiah Butler, was born in 2008 to Centauria Butler. Both boys were very young when their father was killed. In the years after his death, their mothers worked to secure what little remained of Abraham's estate. In 2010, an attorney petitioned for assets, including cars and a home once controlled by Moore, to be returned to Abraham's estate. The goal was to establish trust fund for Moses and Jeremiah. By 2013, the home was officially taken from Moore and returned to the estate, with plans to sell it for the benefit of Abraham's children. In the years since her conviction, Moore has continued to maintain her innocence. She has filed appeals, all unsuccessful. In interviews from prison, she has insisted she didn't kill Abraham, even as the evidence against her remains overwhelming. There's a silence that lingers at the end of Abraham Shakespeare's story. It's the silence of a man who wanted peace, who asked for nothing more than a simple life, and who never got the chance to live it. His name has been tied to headlines about money, betrayal, and murder, but when the noise fades, what remains is the tragedy of a kind man whose trust was broken in the most devastating way. Abraham's story focuses us to confront uncomfortable truths: that sudden fortune can make someone a target, that generosity can be twisted into weakness, and that predators often wear the mask of friendship. But it also leaves us with a responsibility to remember him not as a cautionary tale about money, but as a human being, a son, a father, and a brother whose life mattered. The legacy of Abraham Shakespeare is not the millions he won, nor the way he lost them. It is the reminder that dignity, kindness, and trust are worth more than any jackpot. And when those qualities are exploited, the loss is felt far beyond one family. It's felt by all of us. This was Abraham Shakespeare's story, and it should never be forgotten. Thank you for listening.